Hello, my name is Keith Frankish. I'm a philosopher and writer. Among other things, I'm an honorary reader in philosophy at the University of Sheffield. Now, over the years, I've spent a lot of time thinking about the nature of belief, what it is to believe something, the different kinds of belief there are. And so I'm delighted to take part in this virtual launch for Lisa Bortolotti's new book on the epistemic innocence of irrational beliefs. I think it's an important book, and in this little talk, I'll briefly introduce its main ideas and then say why I think these ideas are so important and fruitful. So I come to praise epistemic innocence, both the book and the idea. Okay, so let's start with the notion of epistemically irrational beliefs. These form the subject of the book. An epistemically irrational belief is one that's not properly sensitive to the evidence for its truth. It's a belief we form without good evidence for its truth and that we hold on to despite evidence for its falsity. If beliefs are maps by which we steer, as the philosopher Frank Ramsey put it, then irrational beliefs are distortions to the map. They're bits of bad cartography. And irrational beliefs like this come in all shapes and sizes. The familiar everyday cases, wishful thinking, for example, self-deception. I guess we're all guilty of this at some time or other. We believe that we're smarter or more popular than the evidence indicates, perhaps, and we hold on to these beliefs despite contrary evidence. And then there are rarer, more distressing cases, such as the delusions suffered by people with schizophrenia, for example, which can dominate a person's life and seriously disrupt their activities. In the book, Bortolotti doesn't make a sharp distinction between these sorts of cases, between the everyday ones and the ones you might meet in clinical settings. She sees them all as instances of the same fundamental phenomenon. And I think that's a good way to approach it. I think that's helpful. Now, although irrational beliefs are and clearly bad from an epistemic point of view, from the point of view of trying to get knowledge about the world, they're not wholly bad. They have psychological benefits. Sometimes we may just not be able to face up to the truth about some things, and we may adopt a view that we find comforting, that helps us to keep going, that gives us the confidence we need, perhaps thinking that I'm smarter than I am or more popular than I am helps me to get up in the morning. So, using the map metaphor again, some distortions in the map may actually be useful to us as we navigate around. Perhaps we mark some regions as inaccessible, or erase regions we'd rather not be there, or perhaps we would prefer to think that the world is a certain way, matches a certain image we have of it, and this makes us happier. So it seems that when we're looking at these beliefs, epistemically irrational beliefs, then we have a kind of trade-off. We can say, well, considered from an epistemic point of view as a contribution to trying to map the world accurately, these are bad, these are faulty, and we should get rid of them. But on the other hand, they perhaps have these psychological benefits, and which maybe they earn their keep because of that. And we seem to have to make this choice. What do we do? How do we balance these two things against each other? And in particular, when in dealing with clinical cases, this can present quite a challenge. Should we confront people with who are delusional, or should we recognize that their delusions may be helpful to them in some way? Now, this is where Lisa Bortolotti makes an important and I think novel claim, and it's this: that there isn't necessarily a simple trade-off here. The situation may be more complicated, because some irrational beliefs may actually have epistemic benefits as well as psychological ones. In a broader sense, they may contribute to our epistemic functioning. So what are the epistemic benefits of irrational beliefs? How can having irrational beliefs help us with acquiring knowledge about the world? Well, you need to read the book. Lisa Bortolotti takes us chapter by chapter through different kinds of irrational beliefs and shows us how, in each case, they may sometimes help us with our epistemic functioning in a broad sense, with the project of acquiring, retaining, and using information about the world. I won't try to summarize the arguments here. They're careful, they're detailed, and draw on a wide range of evidence. So I encourage you to read them for yourself. I'll just indicate some of the general ways in which the irrational beliefs may help epistemically. First, they may help indirectly via their psychological benefits. If you're not functioning well psychologically, then you're not going to function well epistemically, in all probability. For example, if you suffer from debilitating anxiety, then you're not going to engage with other people in a constructive way that enables you to share information, get feedback, and learn. So an irrational belief that helps you to deal with this anxiety may help you to keep on engaging with the world and with other people in a way that allows you to function epistemically. So using the map analogy, we might say that having a distorted map may help you to keep on exploring the terrain and thereby help you to keep on mapping it. Irrational beliefs may also help more directly by enabling us to continue with the project of trying to understand ourselves and our world. Cases where people have memory loss, for example, or don't have any understanding of the causes of their own actions, confabulation may help them to continue taking part in this project of understanding themselves and their world. Even a bad explanation is better than no explanation. It's better than just staying out of the game and giving up on trying to understand. And it opens the possibility, I guess, of later correction and improvement. So it keeps one playing the game. I think that's my understanding of the argument that Bortolotti has in the book. So again, using the map analogy, a distorted map is still a map. It's still keeping us in the business of trying to map things. And it's better than producing no map at all, I guess. It's still part of the overall project. And by continuing to map, we open possibilities of later correction and improvement. Some irrational beliefs may also have epistemic benefits in virtue of being self-fulfilling. They help to make themselves true. Bortolotti argues that this is the case with some beliefs about our own, some optimistic beliefs about ourselves and our relationships. If you believe that you're going to get well or that your relationship is strong, this tends to help your health and the strength of your relationship. So having a belief that is originally not well founded in the evidence may help to bring about the state of affairs that it concerns. Again, with the map analogy, if you draw a track on the map that isn't actually there, because you've drawn it, you might keep walking along that in that direction, and thereby wear a track, create the very track that you've drawn on the map. More generally, Bortolotti suggests irrational beliefs may help by promoting agency, including epistemic agency. They're attempts to make sense of things, attempts to make sense of our world. They may be faulty attempts, but they're at least attempts. They're keeping us in the game of trying to understand the world, of trying to be active as agents in the world, as epistemic agents who can make sense of things. And Bortolotti discusses this with respect to distorted memory beliefs of the sort that patients with dementia have, confabulated explanations, which we can all be prompted to give in certain situations. Very often we don't understand the causes of our own actions. Various kinds of delusions, and optimistically biased beliefs of the sort that I was mentioning earlier about our own health or our relationships. And so this brings us to the central notion in the book, the notion of epistemic innocence. It's a new notion, and I think it's a helpful one. The idea is this: we've seen that some epistemically irrational beliefs may contribute to epistemic functioning in a wider sense, to, as Bortolotti puts it, the overarching aim of acquiring, retaining, and using relevant information. These distortions to the map may actually contribute to the broader project of accurately mapping the terrain. Now, they're still irrational. That doesn't make them rational. But perhaps it means that their irrationality is excusable in the context, particularly if these epistemic benefits that they confer could not easily be obtained in some other way without the irrationality. If there isn't a better grounded belief that's easily available to the agent. In that situation, Bortolotti suggests the irrationality of the belief may be excusable in the light of the wider contribution that it makes to epistemic functionality. And she draws an analogy with cases where what would normally be a crime may be excusable in certain circumstances. If an assault is committed in self-defense, for example, it may be excusable and the agent may be regarded as innocent. Similarly, these irrational beliefs may be epistemically innocent. Okay, so that's a brief introduction to the book. Now, I think one way of thinking about what Bortolotti is up to in this book is to use the notion of bounded rationality, a notion introduced by Herbert Simon and developed by many people since then. It's well known that human reasoning is far from perfect. Humans commit all kinds of logical errors in their reasoning. They don't follow the norms of decision theory when making decisions. They show all sorts of biases. Now, one way of responding to that is to say, well, humans are just naturally irrational. Another way, and the way that Simon suggests, is to say that we're judging ourselves by the wrong standards. We're imposing too strict a notion of rationality on them, and that we should moderate the requirements on rational agents to reflect our own limitations, our cognitive limitations, the limitations of our own minds and brains, and also the conditions under which we have to perform. The time constraints, for instance, and sometimes responses that would be considered irrational by the logic textbooks are actually quite good enough for our purposes and should not be considered as irrational. Now, that perspective is usually applied to reasoning, practical reasoning, decision-making, and theoretical reasoning. Deductive reasoning, for example. And one way of seeing what Bortolotti is doing is that she's extending it to the norms of belief formation. However, she does this not by weakening the epistemic norms. She doesn't claim that the beliefs she's considering are actually rational. She does it by introducing another dimension of normative assessment. So we can say that these beliefs are faulty in one respect, but virtuous in another. So we have a more complex picture of how we assess the rationality of these beliefs. And this view has implications, as Bortolotti discusses in the book, for how we interact with people with epistemically irrational beliefs. It allows for a richer understanding of their situation, I think. We don't have to make this stark choice between a rather sort of patronizing endorsement of their beliefs because they're comforting to them, or, on the other hand, a cold confrontation with the evidence because the beliefs are irrational. We can see that these beliefs may have some epistemic value in themselves, while at the same time acknowledging that they're not ideal. We have a richer way of engaging with each other and assessing each other's rationality. And I think this is a very important and productive move. Okay, so that's my brief introduction to the book. As you can probably tell, I like the book. I think it's an important contribution to the literature on rationality and the ethics of belief. And I think the ideas in the book are going to be very fruitful ones. I think they're going to find application in many other areas, which is perhaps the highest praise that you can give to a philosophy book. And I want to mention two of these applications that I foresee in areas that particularly interest me at the moment. One is in relation to the distinction between belief and acceptance. Let me explain what I mean. I think there's an important distinction to be made between two kinds of belief. Conscious belief, of the kind that you're aware of possessing and that you can report and defend, which is a binary state. It's either present or not present. For any proposition, you either believe it or you don't believe it. And non-conscious belief, which I think is best thought of as a graded state, a state of continuously graded state, which can be very low or very high, and which is evident in your behavior. Your confidence levels are evident in your behavior, but they're not something you can immediately introspect and report. Now, I want to focus for the moment on conscious belief. I've come to the view that conscious belief is best thought of as a kind of commitment, a form of what's sometimes called acceptance. What do I mean by that? Well, to accept a proposition is to be committed to treating it as true, to asserting it, defending it, taking it as a premise in your reasoning, and so on. It's something you do. It's a commitment to doing something. Now, not all acceptances are beliefs. We can accept things for pragmatic reasons and only in certain contexts. Now, an example here that I borrow from the philosopher Jonathan Cohen is the lawyer who, for professional purposes, accepts that her client is innocent. She commits herself to asserting that he's innocent, defending his innocence, taking it as a premise that he's innocent in her deliberations and so on, all within the context of her professional activities, even though perhaps she doesn't really believe that he's innocent and may have very low confidence in his innocence. So there can be acceptances that are not genuine beliefs. Now, conscious belief, I think, is a subspecies of acceptance. It's a kind of general open-ended acceptance that extends to all contexts, including contexts where we want to be guided by the truth. And because of that connection with truth, it's subject to epistemic norms. Now, what do we say about the sort of cases that Bortolotti discusses in the book? Irrational beliefs, delusions, these sorts of things. Are they genuine beliefs, or are they more like the lawyer's pragmatic acceptance? They're certainly conscious attitudes. These are attitudes that people are aware of possessing and that they avow and defend and so on. And should we say they are beliefs, or are they more like pragmatic acceptances? On the one hand, they don't have the sort of tight connection with the evidence that we would expect beliefs to have. And they may be adopted for psychological reasons. So maybe that suggests they're more like the pragmatic kind of acceptance. On the other hand, the people who possess these attitudes think of them as beliefs, and it's quite natural to think of them as beliefs. So what should we say? Well, I think this is what Bortolotti's book has helped me to see, is that really we should stop trying to draw a simple distinction between genuine belief on the one hand and pragmatic acceptance on the other. The picture is much more complicated than that. And we should focus instead on the functions of acceptance. People accept things for all kinds of reasons. Their acceptances serve many different purposes, sometimes multiple purposes. And this is, I think, what Bortolotti's book really brings out. We can accept something perhaps because it's comforting for pragmatic reasons, yet it can also serve wider epistemic ends. We need a multidimensional picture of assessment for these things. Now, I haven't yet thought this through and tried to work out how it might apply to the kind of conscious belief that I favour, but this is something I want to do, and I think that Lisa Bortolotti has given me some tools that will help me do that. So I'm quite excited about that. Now, another application. Oh, if you happen to be interested in my views on conscious belief and acceptance and so on, you might like to have a look at my book, Mind and Supermind, which was published in 2004. Another application that I want to mention briefly is to thinking about political beliefs. This is a topic I've been thinking about recently. I guess it's uncontroversial to say that some political beliefs, at least, are epistemically irrational. Sometimes political beliefs are formed for psychological reasons, as an expression of one's identity as a member of a certain group. If everyone else in your peer group believes something, then there's going to be great pressure on you to believe it too. And if we think about belief in the way that I was describing as a form of acceptance, it's easy to see how this could happen. If everyone else treats it as true, treats a certain political view as true, then there's going to be pressure on you to treat it as true too. And you can do this even if you're not completely convinced of it, even if you think it, even if you doubt it. You can make the sort of pragmatic commitment that the lawyer makes to the claim that her client is innocent. You can decide to treat it as true as everyone else is doing. You commit yourself to asserting it, defending it, reasoning as if it's true, and so on. And then what I think often happens is that in the course of carrying out this commitment, you gradually convince yourself that it is true. Every time you defend it, you come up with further reasons for believing it. And even if you don't convince your opponent, you convince yourself. In fact, I think this is one of the main effect of political debate is often simply to entrench each side's commitment to their own views. Every time they debate them, they debate the issue, they come up with further reasons for believing what they do, and as a result, their confidence in their own view increases. And so what we end up with is that is deeply entrenched views on all sides, and these views are perhaps important to our identity. We've managed to convince ourselves that they're true, and so they're very hard now to give up. So they're impervious to evidence too. Now, one response to that would be to say, well, we should be a lot more cautious in forming political views. And I think perhaps we should, and or at least if we do make these sorts of commitments, we should be very careful about what kind of views we commit to. We should be perhaps qualify the views in various ways. But here's where Bortolotti's ideas may have application. perhaps there's something good to be said about irrational political beliefs after all. Perhaps they may be, as Bortolotti describes, innocent. What I mean is that maybe it's better to make an irrational commitment than not to engage at all. If you're committed to a position, then you're going to have to defend it. And with a bit of luck, you might meet a range of different opponents who can put you on the spot and challenge you and perhaps help you to learn and grow and make your views a little more sophisticated and nuanced. And maybe that's better than just standing outside the arena and saying, "Oh my goodness, isn't it unproductive?" The thought is then that irrational engagement is perhaps better than quietism. Now, I'm not sure that's right. I mean, it's a complicated issue. The point I want to make here is simply that the notion of epistemic innocence helps us to frame such questions. And in so doing, it may help us to advance our thinking about this. So again, I think this is another way in which the book is very helpful. Okay, so now I'm coming to the end, and I think a good place to finish any philosophy talk is with some questions. And any good philosophy book is going to raise lots of questions. And Bortolotti's book does, of course. I'll mention three of them briefly, three questions that occur to me. These aren't problems for the book, they're questions that it raises, further questions that it raises, which are topics for further research, perhaps. First one is, might there be a negative analogue of epistemic innocence, epistemic guilt? What I'm thinking of is this: could there be cases where it would be more epistemically virtuous to choose an irrational belief, even when an appropriate rational one was easily available? As Bortolotti defines epistemic innocence, an irrational belief is epistemically innocent only when a rational alternative is not easily available to the agent. But what if a rational alternative were available, but it would bring fewer benefits than the irrational one, fewer epistemic benefits than the irrational one? Might there then be a case for saying that the rational belief is in some way epistemically guilty? Its wider epistemic effects are negative. Could there be such cases? I don't know, but it's an interesting question to ask, I think. Second, what about credence? Confidence, graded confidence. In the book, Bortolotti focuses on binary belief, on cases where a person either believes something or doesn't believe it. What do we say about graded confidence? Could there be cases where our confidence in a claim is irrational, but still innocent? On the face of it, I guess there could. It would seem that the arguments, that Bortolotti's arguments would apply equally to these cases, but I think there may be complicating issues here, especially if credences are non-conscious. That brings us on to a third question. What do we say about non-conscious beliefs? Can there be irrational beliefs that are non-conscious but still epistemically innocent? Now, again, it seems that the answer should be yes. The argument should apply to non-conscious beliefs just as well as to conscious ones, but I'm not sure. It may be that the epistemic benefits of irrational beliefs that Bortolotti highlights depend on our being aware of having these beliefs, on our being in a position to report them and defend them and engage in debate about them. Again, I don't know the answer to this, but I think it's an interesting question, and it's one that I want to think more about. So there are three questions off the top of my head that the book raises. I'm sure it will raise many more questions in other people's minds. And this is another reason for thinking that it's a rich and important book. Okay, well, that's the end of my little talk. So I'd like to congratulate Lisa on the book. I know it's the product of many years' work, and I think it's a great achievement. And I'd like to urge everyone listening to read the book. I'm sure you will, as I have, learn a lot from it and be stimulated and inspired by it. So, thank you very much for listening.